SAGES Stories.
Welcome to today's episode of SAGES Stories, the official podcast of SAGES, the Society of American Gastrointestinal and Endoscopic Surgeons. Please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you can stay up to date with our most recent episode, and enjoy the show.
Okay, here we are once again with another episode of SAGES Stories, where we shine the light on some of SAGES' most impactful leaders. I'm your co-host, Dr. Kevin El Hayek, coming to you from the sunshine-filled city of Cleveland, Ohio.
I bet you love that opportunity to say that for just one episode a year, don't you?
Oh, you better believe it. I'm going to jump on that opportunity.
Anyway, I'm Dr. Shirin Towfigh, tuning in just a few hours earlier and therefore a few hours longer, sunnier on the best side, the west side, Los Angeles, California.
You still rub that in my face, but that's okay. We've had a great run of episodes, and episode 11 is another that is sure to please our listeners.
Of course we do, Kevin, because our guest today is from none other than Cleveland. And by the way, for those of you who are listening and not driving, I suggest a drinking game. Take a shot each time Kevin mentions Cleveland.
Editor's note, don't do this, you'll die.
Absolutely. Today we have the opportunity to have on the show yet another all-time great of SAGES, Dr. Jeffrey Ponsky. As a brief introduction, Dr. Ponsky completed his surgical training at University Hospitals in Cleveland in 1976. He then joined the faculty of the Department of Surgery at University Hospitals, where he was the director of surgical endoscopy. In 1979, which was a great year, by the way, he became the director of the Department of Surgery at the Mount Sinai Medical Center in Cleveland, where he remained through 1997. Dr. Ponsky later joined the Cleveland Clinic as the director of endoscopic surgery. In 2005, just as I was wrapping up medical school at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. Dr. Ponsky assumed the Oliver H. Payne Professorship and Chair of the Department of Surgery at Case Western University School of Medicine. He has also served as Surgeon-in-Chief at that institute at that time. He then returned to the Cleveland Clinic to concentrate on a practice of foregut surgery and advanced surgical endoscopy in 2014. Ironically, just as I was getting ready to leave for Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi, seeing somewhat of a trend here.
I mean, I think you're just exposing that you are a stalker, Kevin.
Yes, probably true. And as our listeners know, Dr. Ponsky has served as the president of our great society, SAGES, in 1990. And over the years, he was also president of the Ohio chapter of the American College of Surgeons, the Cleveland Surgical Society, and the American Society of Gastrointestinal and Endoscopy at ASGE.
Not to be confused with the defunct American Society for Surgical Endoscopy, or
Yes.
ASSE, for those of you that listened to our episode with Jerry Marks.
Yes. And he is a member of and leader of numerous prominent surgical societies. The list of awards that Dr. Ponsky has received would take up the balance of our time, but I'm sure we'll get into some of that during the show. He's presently the Emeritus Professor of Surgery at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. Welcome to SAGES Stories, Jeff.
Thank you. A pleasure to be with you, Kevin. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Jeff.
Is that it? Are we done?
Yes, we're done.
That's it. It was just to introduce you.
Thank you, Jeff. So we know this isn't your first rodeo, so to speak. I don't know if they have rodeos in Cleveland.
I have rodeos in Cleveland. Yeah.
There we go.
Everybody, yeah.
And I know you've been on multiple podcasts before, the most recent of which was a great episode on the history of the PEG tube on Stay Current Pediatric Surgery, hosted by your very talented son, a pediatric surgeon, and my personal hernia surgery friend, Dr. Todd Ponsky. I believe we'll be making sure that there's a link to that podcast in our show notes, because it was a great episode, and I'm sure it was very fun to do it with your son, Todd.
Oh,
Well, Yes, I agree. So you've already been, I think you've already listened to some of our past Sages Stories podcasts. Many of us minimally invasive surgeons look up to you like a father, Jeff, in the field of surgery. I'm not sure you're aware how much you mean to so many of us. We really look up to you as a father in the field of surgery. Kevin literally refers to you as Papa P, which which I'm sure is based on his affection and admiration for all that you do and your influence on his own personal journey.
Right.
But Kevin may also have some daddy issues, so we don't know. We will delve in that in a future podcast. Okay, so anyway, here we are on the official Sages Stories podcast. Our real goal is not necessarily to review your life in clinical surgery, but rather to learn more about you as a person behind this amazing legacy that you've built, and our audience will learn more about it as we go through all this. We call it kind of like this as being like a living legend series. And in this case, there are tons of stories. I know so many of your stories because we've all had so much interest in it. So I'm really excited about our podcast. So why don't you please start with a little free form, describe your upbringing, a little bit about your journey before your medical career, and maybe we can stop right around medical school.
Yeah, so thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you folks, seriously. It's interesting to talk about those years that you just referred to. I was born in, again, Cleveland. I went to Cleveland Heights High School, public school. I was the worst damn student around. I looked at my my record recently because my wife pulled out some old stuff, and I saw that I looked at my grades. I had a 2.027
Oh, wow.
with my cum graduating from high school.
Wow.
And that was lucky. I never even opened a book. I didn't care. But I did want to be a doctor because I had an uncle who was a physician, and I admired him so much. He was a role model for me, which had pointed out to me for my whole life that role models are so important. And I wanted to be, if I could in my life, respected as he was and a gentleman like he was. I don't know that I ever became the gentleman that he was, but I have been lucky in other ways. But I went to high school. I played little sports poorly. I was very little. I didn't do well, but I was on the football team. I ran around chasing ladies and having fun with my friends. I was never a drinker. There was no such thing as drugs in those days, so that wasn't even an issue. And when it came time to go to college, I took the ACT exams, and I did pretty fair on those, but I had no idea what it was about. And my college counselor, my unit counselor, said to me, Jeff, I think you should consider just going to trade school, because I don't think you're going to do well in college, and your parents don't have much money. They didn't have any money. And my father sold used tires for a living. And he said, I consider not going to college. But I decided I wanted to try, and I wanted to be a doctor. So I got into a very good school, Miami University of Ohio, but I got in midterm, which is when I graduated high school. And I went to Miami of Ohio. And that day that I was dropped off by my mother, and I turned around and I said, look, I'm going to do this as best I can do. I don't know what I'm going to do. All I know is that I'm going to work my butt off, and I'm not going to screw around, and I'm not going to party, because I'd done that my whole life. And now I was just going to study. Now, I didn't really know what that meant. I had a whole bunch of pre-med courses, the usual stuff. In those days, it wasn't very flexible. We had a standard curriculum. I took English and I took Spanish because you're required to have a language, and I took some history, but I also took zoology and biology and chemistry. And it was a hard load, but all I did is study and study, and I didn't know what that meant. And my idea of studying was to memorize everything. I ate the book so I could spit it out, and I took copious notes. And when everybody else was out after dinner or partying on the weekends or rushing fraternity, which I did, but I didn't go, I just studied. I memorized everything. And I found out that my memory was unbelievable. I could eat the book and spit it out. And so I started to get good grades. And my first semester chemistry, I got a first grading period, I got a C. Second grading period, I got a B. And then I got a B plus. And then the next semester I did better. And zoology, I got perfect scores on my exams because I memorized everything and I understood it. And suddenly I realized that memorizing wasn't everything, but I started to relate and understand stuff, and I liked it. I like getting good grades, and the dean's list was something I had to look up. I didn't even know what it was. I made the dean's list. And then in the summer, it was only a first trimester where I went there. My uncle, again, my great uncle, he was a superb man. He got me a job as an orderly in the hospital, Mount Sinai Hospital. And I took this job and I made beds and I gave bed baths and I changed bed pans. I took the nurses out who were the student nurses, but it was fun. And I suddenly loved it. I wanted to be a doctor even more.
I want to talk to
And
the patient who got the bed bath by Dr. Ponsky.
I did bed baths. And one of the patients was a kid who I went to high school with, was in a terrible auto accident, and he became a paraplegic. And I took care of him every day, giving him a bed bath, changing his bedpan.
Oh,
And I saw this as a great privilege. And suddenly I became a little bit more mature. I said, this is something I want. I really wanted it now. And went back to school, and I was a monster. I wasn't fun to be with. I wasn't fun for my friends, and ladies that I took out thought that I was crazy because I just wouldn't stay out late. I would come home and study. And I just studied and studied, and I did very well. So I did everything I could to improve my grades every summer. The next summer I was promoted to a scrub nurse, scrub tech. And they would let me close fascia, and the head nurse would come in and scream at me, "You're not allowed to do that." But they would let me do it anyhow. And I got pretty good at sewing. And I went through college, and I made Phi Beta Kappa, and I did okay on my MedCats, and I got into a few medical schools. It was funny, I never took calculus. I mean, I remember getting into a couple of medical schools. I used to use what they called logarithms, and you used to go around calculus to figure it out when I took physics and stuff. And I had a mental block that I wasn't going to take calculus. And when I got into Northwestern and Cincinnati, then I went to Case Western for an interview, and the dean of admissions said to me, "Are you going to take calculus?" I said, "No, I'm not going to take it because I've already got into 2 medical schools." And he said, "Okay," and I got in there anyhow. And I don't think I ever needed calculus. And I was very happy to get into medical school, but I also really enjoyed working as a scrub nurse in medicine because I saw what it was like from the inside. I loved being an orderly. I loved having hands-on contact with patients. Later on, years later, I started a program for high school students. When I was the chief of surgery at Mount Sinai, the same kind of program where they could do what I did. And almost all those guys went into medicine. It was a good program.
I love this story.
Yeah. True story.
so you were in at Northwestern Cincinnati, and you ultimately obviously got into Case Western, so they admitted you as well. So what made you decide on Case versus going to the other schools?
It wasn't very complicated. My uncle had gone to, it was Western Reserve then, it became Case the next.
Okay.
I decided my uncle had gone there, but more practically, we didn't have money. And I had to live at home. I couldn't be living in some apartment. I went to medical school as I went to college on loans and scholarships. And so I couldn't be wasting money living in a city where I had to pay rent. So Case was a good school. I was very proud to get into it, but it was a practical matter as well. They also had something there called the new curriculum where they didn't give grades, it was pass fail. And I like that as well.
They got rid of that by the time I got there. So that must have been nice for your
They
generation.
gave grades when you went there?
Oh yeah, we had grades.
We only had pass, fail, and honors when I was there, so. But
I love this story. I think people think that, if they don't get 4.0 in high school, then like their whole future is dead. But I know a handful of people, and you're the most significant one where things change when you go to college. Your goals and your understanding of like this is serious. Like I need to make a future, build a future for myself. It changes.
I think
Yeah.
you have to expose kids to role models
Hmm.
and mentor them and encourage them. And I met a kid today who was working in my yard. And this kid is a country boy, and he was digging a hole with me for a fire pit. And I found out he's a physics major doing very well, taking advanced physics. And I said to him, did you ever think about medicine? He said, no, I never knew anybody in medicine. I said, sit down, son, we're going to have a little talk. Because you like to work with your hands. You could be a surgeon, and I'm going to help describe that to you a little bit. And we did that. So I think it's important to mentor kids starting in high school and let them learn a little bit about what we have to offer. We have to sell our profession.
Hmm. Yeah. That kid's going to be a future Sages Story podcast guest member. In about 20 years, we'll have him on.
He'll be a co-host. He's gonna host. We're gonna be guests at that point, hopefully.
I love this. And then when you went to medical school, did you know you want to be a surgeon then, or because you were exposed to it as a scrub tech, or was it later?
Medical school is interesting because I tell the story. Here I go to medical school because I was a street fighter and I was just studying and memorizing, and I got good grades. And now I'm in medical school with kids who went to Princeton, Harvard, and Yale. And I'm scared to death because they're not jokers. They're really smart kids, not like me, who was a street fighter, I thought. But I did the same thing there. And suddenly I realized that I was okay. And I was getting good grades in medical school too. And I could do it. And so you go through all these clerkships, and you expose yourself to all this stuff. And every clerkship I was on, I loved every single one. I got honors in every one. And I just loved them. I like psychiatry. Oh my God. I got an honors in psychiatry. I loved internal medicine. I love cardiology. I won the award in my class for being the best in cardiology. Who knew? But in OBGYN, I loved it because I sewed so much and they let me do a little stuff in the operating room. And frankly, surgery was a good clerkship, but it wasn't necessarily my best clerkship. But I like to do stuff with my hands, and I'd had an experience in surgery outside of medical school. And I said, yeah, I'm going to try this. Originally, I thought I wanted to be a heart surgeon or, something like that. And then I saw how they lived and I decided that wasn't for me. I didn't want to.
Oh, yes. Well, psychiatry is interesting. I feel like some of the best surgeons are the ones that got honors in psychiatry. I don't know if you feel that way.
There's no reason that you can't be empathetic and be interested in psychiatric disease and still be somebody interested in the technical sides. And I think that people think, oh, surgeons are so impersonal, cold, and heartless, and that's just not true. I think in the old days when we were forced to work inhumane hours and had to work so hard, we became exhausted and we didn't think enough about that. But I think that surgeons can be better psychiatrists than some of the psychiatrists now. They're more empathetic in some ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
So who were some of your early influences that decided, that helped you decide that you wanted to be in surgery?
Well, that's good. It's interesting. I worked at Mount Sinai Hospital. Some of the surgeons there were elegant technicians, and I watched their handiwork and I said, wow, that is really superb to be able to use your hands that way, to be able to throw knots that beautifully, to be able to remove an organ bloodlessly and things like that. That was really very impressive for me. Going through medical school, I had some terrific role models. There was a fellow named Bill Holden, who was our chairman of surgery. And this fellow was elegant. He was a superb teacher, Socratic method,
Mhm.
always worried about teaching. And I don't think he was the greatest technician, but he was the greatest teacher. And then there was a guy named Walter Porres, who I worked with, who's still teaching over at in East Carolina.
Wow.
And Walter was a showman. He was a showman, and he would teach you about diseases and how they really impacted the patient. He would walk around on walk rounds, and he would walk you into a room, a group of students, and the patient was very ill. And he would walk you in the room, and then he said, look around in here. And then you'd walk out, and he would say, do you smell that? And everybody was sniffing. And he, what are you talking about? Don't you smell? Go back in and smell that. And we were all sniffing. He would say, that's the smell of death. Now, there was no smell, but Walter wanted you to perceive the situation. And he would do things that were, showmanship stuff. For example, he would have patients with bed sores, and he would have us going to the bedside at Metro Hospital, Kevin, listen carefully, at your hospital. And he would walk up to the bedside on the ward and pull the curtains, and we would inject local into the thigh subcutaneously and raise a wheel, and then take a knife and a needle. With the needle, we pierce the skin, and with the knife, tangentially cut off tiny little postage stamps of skin, and then go to the bed sore, which we'd scrape the granulation tissue and lay these postage stamps down.
Oh, skin
Okay, those
grafting.
were called pinch grafts.
Wow.
And the pinch
Oh.
grafts would then
Skin
take
graft? Those
and
were
spread.
skin
It was,
grafts?
it was a skin graft. And Walter would have the students doing this to get them to do something they could do. And we'd see the skin grafts take, and I wrote an article about this in the journal Surgery, which I called, what did I call it? Pinch grafts and zinc, because he always talked about giving the patient zinc. But Walter was a great teacher at all levels. And he was a great mentor for me. And when I wrote my first paper with him as a student, it was about paradoxical air embolism in a patient we encountered who had it. And he made me rewrite it 6 times. It was a letter to the editor of the New England Journal. And he would read German poetry to me to try to get me to write in a more poetic way. So these aren't medically important, but they're important as being a mentor, to spend the time with the student, to engage them. And that's what he did. He was wonderful.
That's pretty amazing. I love all these stories. It's each hospital has its own, like, what do you call it? The people that like the legend within that
Their
hospital.
own lore. Each
Yeah, their
hospital
own
has
lore,
its own
exactly.
lore.
Yes,
And as
absolutely.
I've gotten older and worked around in many hospitals and been visiting professor in 100, I've seen and heard and given the honorary lectures in their name of all of these people throughout the country who have contributed to the education of the younger generation. And they're legendary for what they've done. And there's stories about all of them. In Cleveland, Kevin, I could give a whole grand rounds at the Cleveland Surgical about the people I knew in Cleveland who were great mentors and wonderful role models, who you've maybe heard their name, but they're legendary in their time. And every hospital, we used to have a lot of little hospitals, and they were in every hospital.
Yeah, I mean, and your name has come up, as you probably know, just a few times in the last 10 episodes, frankly, due to your influence on so many SAGES leaders over the time. And you were getting started with surgery, you kind of look at the 76 and 79, right at the beginning of kind of a cosmic shift toward minimally invasive surgery. What was that like in the late 70s, early 80s? And I know you were exposed to a lot of people here, and obviously Walter Porres was a was a chairman of Metro Health, and you mentioned Dr. Holden and everything, just great leaders. So what was that like?
I was so lucky because the story goes that I was a resident. We were on every other night, 36 on, 12 off. We got weary, but then I had an elective and I wanted to do something a little lighter. And I saw the gastroenterologist fussing around with the endoscope, and they were brand new then. You could barely see through them. And I said, I'm going to do that. I'm going to sign up to do that for an elective. And then I signed up. And then 2 weeks before, I called him, what time should I show up? And the head of GI says to me, we're not training any surgeons, just forget it, which obviously piqued my interest. And then Charles Hubey, who was at University Hospital, chief of general surgery, said, I got a buddy named Jim King, a young guy, just went into practice in Canton, Ohio. And he's so good. And he's doing 20 to 30 cases a week, and he wants to train somebody. He arranged it for me to go there. I went every day for about 5-6 months, longer than most people's electives. They let me finish. I did about 500 cases. The colonoscope wasn't even intended to go to the cecum then. It was a middle length then. And when I came back, I'd done all these cases, and I said to the head of gastroenterology, can I help train these guys? Your fellows. And he said, you're not going to touch this scope. And so the VA had a scope, and Jerry Benson, who was there then, said, yeah, you can use our colonoscope, which was an Olympus, and it was okay. And then I used that a little bit, but then I told at a family dinner one night, I told the story how I couldn't use the scope, and Bill Holden didn't have any money to give me money to buy a scope. And I got a call from my mother-in-law the next day when I was on call. She said, go buy yourself a Hanukkah present. You got the scope. So she bought me the scope.
Oh.
And in those days, we didn't have high-level disinfection. We washed it with green soap. I kept it in the back of my car with the light source. And I got calls day in and day out from the private guys at the University Hospital because they couldn't get the GI guys to come in day or night. I came in. Bob Zollinger Jr. stood there while I did the cases and signed the papers, but I was a senior resident, not chief. And I did all these cases. And by the end of the 2 years that I finished, the GI guys weren't even doing cases. I was doing everything. Then Holden came up with money to give me a grant, and instead to pay my mother-in-law back, instead I bought an ERCP scope. So that.
And did you know Jerry Marks at this time? Because it sounds like he was pretty much storing the endoscope in the same way, and his yeah, he was storing it and cleaning it the same way. He said he cleaned it and stored it.
We all did. Everybody did that, and that we didn't know better then. Okay, we didn't wear gloves when we did endoscopy, and we didn't, and so it was interesting because Jerry Marks came into my life in about 1981, because that's when SAGES was born, around that time. And that was a whole different thing. And so that's a whole different story. And I'm sure you heard that story before, but SAGES was born. You asked about minimally invasive surgery. When we started SAGES in 1990, when I became president, we had like 300 members. And we were giving courses about surgical endoscopy relative to the relationship between surgery and endoscopy and how we would use it for surgical problem solving. And then, of course, Jacques Parasat came to our meeting in Louisville, Kentucky, and in the exhibit hall showed the video of Lap Coley. Well, I was lucky because I was president of SAGES then, and I got to be right in on the ground floor. You couldn't buy instruments then. You couldn't get them. And so we used the GYN instruments. I took a course, Nat Soper, George Bursey, John Hunter, and John Sakier taught this course in Salt Lake City. I took the course, one of the first ones. But the funny part is when I went back to my hospital to do it, Mount Sinai, I was going to do it on somebody who was on the board of trustees. My first 2 cases, first guy was on the board of trustees.
Well, you know how to pick them, huh?
Yeah, but who was going to be my proctor for that case? We had to have a proctor. David Doppler, who was one of my first fellows, probably one of my first, Dave Doppler came from Portland, Maine at that time, and he stood there. He had done 8. And he stood there while John Mellinger and I did the first 2 at Mount Sinai.
These are awesome. Jerry said he had no problems buying colonoscopy. He just borrowed money without telling his wife. And
Yeah,
then-
that's how he did it. That's right. He just took money out. That's right.
That's right.
and would
No,
buy
we
the
all had to
colonoscopy.
find the money somewhere to buy one.
At least your wife knew about it because it was
Oh,
coming
yeah,
from
she
her
did.
mom. Yeah.
She did.
Okay, so you finished residency, even though you were doing all these like really innovative stuff as a resident. And then what was your first position out of residency then? Because you were a very young director of surgery. at
Well,
Mount
first of all,
Sinai, right?
I joined the staff at University Hospitals, chief of surgical endoscopy, age 20. What was I? 29.
20 anything.
Okay.
Unbelievable. That's
29.
unbelievable.
And so I joined the staff and I'm doing endoscopy. And ironically, I was doing a lot of babies at that time because there was no pediatric gastroenterologist. Bob Izant, who was my great friend and mentor, head of pediatric surgery, said, Jeff, you need to scope all these babies. He was my big supporter. So we were scoping babies who were newborns and when they would bleed or whatever. And Mike Gowder was hired and I helped recruit him. And he would stand there and we'd do endoscopy and you'd see the light shining through. And Mike was always interested in doing innovative stuff. And he wanted to do a minimally invasive gastrostomy. And we had the idea by poking our finger on the belly. And we put together this idea, no IRB. All we did is talk to the patient's family, little babies with birth asphyxia and psychomotor retardation. We did PEG just before I went to Mount Sinai. So I was 32 when we did the PEG in about May of 1979, did 5 babies. And then I went to Mount Sinai, age 32 as chief of surgery.
Wow. And just to think that right around that time, Kevin was like a little baby in Cleveland, a couple miles.
Youngstown, a couple miles south.
I
miles
called him
away.
to come help, but he didn't come, you know?
Yeah, I was just graduating high school around then. So
A little unnecessary fact you would never know unless you listen to this podcast.
So,
after your time at Mount Sinai, so 1997, you finished up there. It's no secret that you kind of played a little career pinball and bounced between Cleveland Clinic and university hospitals. Would you walk us through some of those transitions? Like, what were some of the key factors that went into? I'm sure were huge decisions to transfer.
well,
These
the
huge.
favorite place I ever worked in my life was Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai was a heaven to work in. It was a small hospital with a staff where every single person knew each other. We had a laboratory that was unequaled, and it was bigger than the clinic's laboratory for animals. And I had the freedom to have courses and fellows, and it was magnificent. We did research, the relationship between GI and myself. We had Tony Tavel, Roy Ferguson. We had a great relationship. I was doing tons of ERCP, had my first fellows, and it was really a great thing. But it was a small hospital living between the Cleveland Clinic and university hospitals, and it had a big debt. And it was sold to a for-profit company. And the minute that happened, I had meetings with those people. They were for-profit guys who could care less about quality. And the minute it happened, I was recruited by Mike Henderson to come to the clinic because he knew what was going on there.
Wow.
And I said, that's time. I've been there 18 years. And I went to be head of minimum. Well, it wasn't head of, I was head of surgical endoscopy when I went to the clinic. They had a search for the head of minimally invasive surgery. And I was the first head of MIS there. I'd already been president of SAGES and ASGE by the time I went there to the Cleveland Clinic.
Yeah.
And during this time,
Yeah.
sorry, Kevin.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
And during this time, when did you start your family?
My family?
Yeah.
My family started back when I was a resident. I had several of my kids before. I had all but one of my children were born before I finished my residency. My last year of residency, my last son was born. My daughter was born 3 years later.
Apparently,
when
the
I went
hours
to
weren't
Mount
that back
Sinai.
then.
So my wife had no partners helping her. I was on call every other night, but here's the important part. You got to have a good partner. To have all the success doesn't come down because you're a genius. You have to either destroy your family, as many people did in the past, or use that to bolster your success. And my family, my wife, my kids, my in-laws were always around me. So our success was a joint success, not just my success. I'm the one who has led the way. And it was true of many of my partners at Mount Sinai. And I've said this in my presidential addresses, all of us who go out and give lectures, we're great stars and we give visiting professorships. Who's watching our patients when we go? We all have a partner who's making rounds and taking our patients back when we have complications, and we call and when we get back in town and say, is everything okay? Those are the heroes as well. We don't do this on our own.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
a really
absolutely.
good point.
It's a great point.
And then were your parents able to kind of see how you've kind of gone up the ranks and been so successful in your career?
That's a great
Coming
question.
from like
Yeah, they
different
were.
background?
They were, I'm not sure they understood the academic world. To them, the greatest pride was that they were in the Jewish community. So for me to have been chief of surgery at Mount Sinai Hospital was like a dream for them. Everywhere they went, people knew that I was the chief of surgery, and they loved that. They saw my success. I think academically, my greatest achievement, in a job was being the chairman of the Department of Surgery at Case Western Reserve. I think that I was chair of the board of surgery. They wouldn't have understood that. That
Right.
to them didn't mean anything. They saw it as the chief of surgery at Mount Sinai. That's enough. I'm done, because that was what they knew. But
So they saw it. So they
Yeah.
saw it.
Yeah, I think they saw everything. But I think that for my sons who are surgeons, they understand a little bit more.
And both your sons are surgeons.
I have two sons as surgeons, one who's a real estate magnate and builds buildings, and my daughter is a professional photographer. So they're all very successful in their own right.
Yeah, they're great kids. I know them. I know them all. I think another thing is you've been involved in so many medical students and trainees' lives throughout these years. And one of the really kind of cool things about you and in getting to work with you and knowing you, even when I met you as a third-year medical student, is how well you remember everyone's name, even my name, Kevin El Hayek. Is that a superpower of yours, or do you have to really work at
If
knowing?
someone aggravates you as much as you've aggravated me and my other fellows, then you remember their name.
Unforgettable.
Talk to my fellows. They used to make fun of me because when we used to do ERCP in particular, or other endoscopy, and my hands were busy, I would kick them or headbutt them or give them a nudge. And one day, one of my fellows came wearing shoulder pads to the ERCP suite. And one day I went to kick Jeff Hazy under the table,
Oh,
and I
Jeff
missed him. He
Hazy.
hurt my leg, and he laughed so hard.
Oh,
But no, it is a relationship. But I will tell you something that's interesting, and I think when you train people, you form a sort of familial relationship with them, and you have to tell them the truth. There have been many times, and some of our partners knew this, where some of my fellows were being recruited at the institution where I was training them. And I would sit them down and say, that is not the best opportunity for you. There is a great opportunity here because they need you more, because this is a better academic opportunity, because the people you'll be working with are more akin to what you need, or your family is in that city. Your husband or wife's family is in that city. You want to have your kids near their grandparents. Don't just choose a job because it's at a great institution. And, I've often counseled people away from where I was working because I think there's a better life opportunity somewhere else. And my fellows will tell you that I've told them, go where the opportunities are best for your whole life, not just for your name of your institution.
And I think with all this mentoring you've done and training, you've also seen how specialized our specialty has become, right? You've been in academic surgery for so many years. You've seen that we have now multiple subspecialties within general surgery. You're part of that kind of subspecialty, minimally invasive surgery, endoscopic procedures. Looking back, what were some operations or approaches you thought would be standard options for patients for years to come, and yet now they're completely obsolete?
Well, I thought that a distal splenorenal shunt was a great operation when I first did it. I dare say you've not done those. And I
You
was
would
the
be
first
correct.
one in Cleveland to do it. I had a guy named Jerry Wolkoff help me with it. I had just gone on the staff of University Hospitals. I thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. It was based on physiology. We were going to reduce the pressure in the varices, okay, and without decreasing portal flow. What a great idea by Dean Warren. It lasted for a
Yeah.
couple of years, and then we started putting rubber bands on the varices, and nobody does that anymore. So I thought that was a great operation. I started doing a vertical banded gastroplasty in
Oh,
the
nice. Yeah.
mid 80s.
Mhm.
I thought that was going to be a great operation for bariatrics. I did 180 in 1 year. What a great operation. You guys got to reverse them
Wow.
all later
Yes.
on because
Yeah.
True.
and so things come and go, you know, and you think operations are going to be here and then they go. And I dare say in 20 years, you may say, I remember when we did colonoscopy for screening on all these patients, you know,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and
Mhm.
Dr. Ponsky did 1,600 colonoscopies last year. What a joy. I mean, come on.
Wow.
That's not
Yeah.
going to keep going, and we'll do
Yeah.
other things in the future, and you'll remember that we did it. So
Piggybacking off of that thought, fill in this sentence for us. Dr. Jeffrey Ponsky's favorite operation is?
ERCP.
Okay,
Ah, yes.
nice.
To me, ERCP is like golf for some people. I love ERCP. I would have come in day or night to do ERCP. I just loved it. Ironically, in my last few years at the clinic, I didn't have a fellow learning ERCP. My fellows were doing other things. And so the young gastroenterologists loved it so much, and this was their career. So I only did the ones that they asked me to do or when they asked me to cover. But I didn't, in the last couple of years, I didn't do it as much because of that reason. But do I love it? If anything, if they called me right now and said, come back and do ERCP, I would go back and do it. I love
What's the history of ERCP? How did that go from how did we go from EGD to ERCP? Because it's fundamentally a different
ERCP is a
scope.
different game.
Yeah.
That was developed really, I mean, the first one was done by surgeons at GW Hospital, but it was sort of a trick. But the procedure was really developed in Japan by a fellow named Itaru Oi and other people in Japan, and Olympus and other companies built scopes for them, Machida. And then a fellow in, obviously in Germany, you had the Germans and the Japanese and Peter Cotton and his colleagues in London. They all started embellishing it, making it better. And how did I learn it? I learned it on my own. I watched a ton of videos and I really got good at it. I was very lucky. And it was funny. There was a gastroenterologist who was in private practice in Allegheny General Hospital in Pittsburgh, and he wanted to learn laparoscopy. We were doing it under local in 1975. And he was doing sphincterotomy. He made his own sphinctertomes, George Broadmerkel. So we made a deal. He came to Cleveland. I taught him under local to do peritoneoscopy for liver biopsy. And I
Wow.
went there and he taught me to do sphincterotomy. That was it. But ERCP is like a golf game. There's a body English in it. It's very sophisticated and I love it. Great game, great procedure.
That's awesome. And despite being a highly qualified surgeon, you've also chosen to get additional surgery. I mean, not surgery, additional education. In your case, you got an executive MBA. Is that right?
Yeah, I got an MBA because I was going through a midlife crisis at some point, and I decided I
So,
was
you
either
know,
going to take a truck driving.
motorcycle MBA, like
Yeah,
he
no,
goes
really.
MBA.
So I got this MBA.
He got the
from-
motorcycle too. I'm
I
sure
have
he
the
got the
motorcycle
motorcycle too.
But it's interesting because the administrators at our hospital say, you know, you make all these decisions, it's out of your gut. You don't know what the return on investment is. You don't know how to finance it. Get an MBA, we'll pay for it. So I got this MBA and I met wonderful people and I learned the language of business. And you do. I mean, the dean of the business school said the first day, he said, you won't be a good businessman when you finish this, but you'll be able to sit in a business meeting and say bullshit at the right time. And I have, and it's important. And so I learned business, but I hate business. I don't care about business. My kids are in business. They have all these investments and startups and this and that. And I say, I'm leaving the room because I'm not interested in that. I'm much more interested in horses and other things like that. Digging holes in the ground.
So I'm actually halfway through the same program.
Yeah.
Because he's a stalker.
Yeah. Did you
So-
learn how to do the internal rate of return and the net present
Yes.
value?
So I'll
Yeah.
soon be a double alumnus with you as well, which is a fun fact. So both med school and the that is, if you recommend I even complete year 2, it sounds like
No, let me just tell you the most important thing about business school. It's the people you meet.
Yeah.
It's the way they think. It's
Yeah.
the way they approach a problem.
Yeah.
It's the thought process. You know, I don't like business necessarily, but when I'm presented with a business problem or in medicine or whatever, I say, well, wait a second, that's just the revenue side. What's your net margin? You know what I mean? What are your sales? You have the questions to ask. You may not like the whole process, but you understand it. And it's structural thinking. And I think business is just another thing to learn, just like music or something else or art.
I love this. I love this. But I think this whole Cleveland connection can go on for days and days.
Magical Cleveland, you know.
It really is.
We
It
spent the
really
most
is.
money in history on a quarterback who'll never play. Is that a great business deal? That's a great business deal. That's Cleveland. I mean, come on.
So Jeff, you did talk, you talked a little briefly about SAGES at its infancy and so on. We've had several guests so far, Jerry Marks, Rick Green, George Bursey. They've all talked about, you know, SAGES at its infancy. So and that's been kind of an evolving storyline through our podcast. What is your version of how you saw SAGES initiated and then as you've seen it kind of grow?
Yeah, so say I have a different perspective. I was already on the governing board of ASGE, or just going on the governing board when SAGES started. And I felt a little bit like a traitor to ASGE because here are these group of surgeons who decided they're going to start their own society. And I wasn't quite sure. I joined and I went to the meetings. I was on the governing board. And I went to the first meeting. One of the meetings that Jerry Marks had at the Legionnaires Hotel, that's what it was called. It has a different name, in Pennsylvania. And I listened to the papers, and the papers were nothing like the papers at ASGE. How do you use endoscopy in a bowel obstruction? How do you evaluate your suture line? How do you deal with a volvulus of the intestine endoscopically? All of these things were surgically related problems. They had nothing to do with what was going on at ASGE, and the light went off in my head. There is a reason for this society, intraoperative endoscopy, things that we would do. And so I got really committed to SAGES. And the people who started SAGES came from different areas. I could tell you their names, but some of them were upper GI surgeons, a lot of colorectal surgeons, Ted Schrock, Jerry Marks, Lee Smith, and people like that who were just magnificent colorectal surgeons, other foregut surgeons, and general surgeons. And we got together and we had this perspective, and SAGES started to grow. When laparoscopy came in, we had a whole new group of people who weren't involved necessarily with flexible endoscopy. They were laparoscopists. And even today, the number of flexible endoscopists, although it's much increased, is not the predominant number. Most of them, I think, are laparoscopy surgeons, minimally invasive surgeons. But endoscopy is now, because of SAGES, and this was an influence that I was able to have through the board, endoscopy has been made a part of surgery now, and general surgery. It is a requirement for general surgery. I remember going to the residency review committee when Joe Fisher was the head of it and saying, we need to have a minimum. Now, people say it's a joke, 50 cases. But boy, did they hate that I added 50 cases. But the GI people think it's a pittance, but it's a beginning. And surgery requires endoscopy now, and the people that do it see the need for it. People that do it can't imagine evaluating their pouches on their bariatric surgery or dilating a stricture without it.
Yes.
The endoscope is now the vehicle, it's the car that gets us to our destination. It drives us to our destination. Then we put it down, we have it fixed, and we start to operate endoscopically, whether we're dilating a stricture or cutting something or muscle, whatever we're doing, the endoscope is the vehicle that gets us there. And so we've started to discover that. That's what SAGES is about now.
Yeah, that's actually a great perspective, and definitely, as you said, different from our other guests. And really, it alludes to the fact that you've been involved in so many other societies. SAGES is a mere fraction of your academic legacy. How are you able to kind of keep all of that straight, especially with a growing family, your chair of surgery? I mean, I feel like that's probably one of the biggest challenges that I have. And I work half as hard as you were working at my age. And that's probably also true in regards to how hard my father works even now. So I just think your generation was fashioned a little bit differently than ours.
No, it's not. Kevin, all I tell people is always volunteer, never say no, get involved in everything. And you know what? You'll find the time. You don't have to belabor decisions. Make a decision and move on. Do the work. Get people to help you. You don't have to do it all yourself. I had my residents helping me on most of this stuff. We would have papers written. You know how we write papers. We give them the idea. Sometimes I even write the outline and tell the younger resident, help me fill this in, get the references, let's go. And you can do all of this stuff. The truth is you don't have to let your family suffer. You can do it all. When you go on a trip to a meeting, take them with you. Let them go out and play while you go to the meeting. I've sat in a lot of meetings looking out the window, wondering what they're doing. And but they are there with me. And by the way, my wife traveled with me most of the meetings I went to. If I went to Cincinnati to give a lecture, she didn't go. If I went to Paris, she was there. And
I wonder why. That's strange. Why wouldn't she want to go to Cincinnati?
Yeah, so
very devoted wife.
Don't be afraid to do everything. Don't say I'm too busy. You can do everything. And there have been things that I got, and I've regretted some of the things I quit, actually. But don't be afraid to get involved.
But I think what's unique with you, it's something I've admired ever since I was in residency, because when I was a resident, endoscopy was colonoscopy was not mandated. It came right shortly after I graduated, and I'm like amazed that I kind of missed out on that. I do some, but it's not. It was never part of my training, and I think it's such an important mandate as part of the residency. But what's unique with you is you've always also been fun. I don't know how to say this without, diminishing everything you've done, but you're innovative. You're all about the science. You've been someone to take this specialty forward, but you're also very personable and fun. Do you have like non-surgical interests that you can share with us?
Yeah, first of all, if I'm fun, my wife would disagree. But if I do anything fun, it's because I don't take myself too seriously, and you shouldn't, because there are really other people around who've done many more things than me, and I respect all of these other people.
I remember your first Instagram post with Todd Ponsky, your son, dancing with the grandchildren.
That could be. My son probably posted that, but because I wouldn't know how. But the funny thing, I like a lot of different things. I like physical work. I have a barn and horses, And I'm not a great horseman, but I love to be out in the barn every day. I feed the horses, muck the stalls, put in screws and fix things and invent things in the barn, like a watering system. And I just like to have a hobby, and you learn about stuff. So I have friends outside of surgery that I go out to their barns and they don't know what I do for a living. And I just go out there and fuss around with them. Listen, there are people who have wonderful hobbies. They're cooks, they're artists. Jerry Marks is a magnificent watercolor artist.
Oh, we
His
know. Oh, we
Oh
know.
yeah, we saw that.
calendars are legendary.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, so people have hobbies, and if you don't have hobbies, you're cheating yourself. So I do, and I have a motorcycle. My wife got it for me when I was 70. She would not let me get a two-wheel motorcycle. I always wanted one. It's a trike. So it's a big Harley with two wheels in the back and one in the front. We've been to Sturgis. Can you imagine? I went to Sturgis
Oh my
with all the
gosh.
bikers.
South
But-
South Dakota.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Yeah.
Great
Oh
trip.
my gosh.
Great trip.
So I have a question that I'm sure many people have asked you, and I'm actually interested in your response. You've lived your whole life in Cleveland, Shot. Has there ever been a time when you've been tempted to move? And if so, where would you live?
The answer is no. I've never been tempted to move because my family's here. It's all about your family. Right now, I live on 8 acres of land with horses. Guess what? My son, Zach, the builder, bought the lot next door to me and built a house. So he's got 5 acres next to my 8 acres, so that's 13. And my daughter bought the house 2 houses down from me with another 5 acres. So I've got them within, and their land touches mine. So I can go right with a golf cart to them. So that's them. My Todd used to live almost a half an hour from me, but that wasn't good. So he moved within a half a mile from me. So Todd's close. And my other son, Lee, has the temerity to live almost 2 miles from me. So they're
2
all
miles.
Yeah.
He might as well be in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, he's like a foreigner. But so what I'm saying is our whole family's here, and with 10 grandchildren. And so it's an interesting situation. So I've never been tempted. We do have a house in Florida because the weather here in the winter is not fun. So I go to Florida. I've had it for 13
Really?
years. And I go there. By the way, you said, how could you go to Florida when you were working full time? I would go on a Friday. I would leave Friday morning at 6 a.m. and come back on Monday. Okay. And I would take vacation days on those 2 days. And I would have a few days in Florida over the weekend. And it was enough to have fun. And COVID was great because I was down there a lot. But I think you can make it happen.
Well, that's also a testament for what a great guy you are, that your whole family wants to be so
No.
near you. You have like the
No,
Ponsky
that's
compound.
totally wrong. My family only wants to be near my wife. They
Aw.
could care less about me
Oh, Jackie.
unless something breaks. Then they
Yeah.
call me,
Yeah.
but they only want to be near my wife.
Yeah. She's
That's
pretty
I want
so
to be
lovely.
very clear about that.
She's
She
pretty
is
great.
the glue that holds our family together. Totally.
I have a feeling Kevin may be moving within your compound.
Yeah,
too.
I'm coming soon. I'm gonna get a couple acres too.
If you can muck the stalls, you're welcome.
Yeah, I'll muck stalls. Heck yeah.
Okay, so our next segment is really one of our favorite segments of the show. We call it the We Are the Sages segment.
We are the world. We are the sages. We are the sages. Sing it, everybody. We are the ones who make it bright our day. So let's start treating.
Okay.
It's awesome. For this segment, we want to hear about your favorite sages memory. And since you may have more than one, feel free to give us more than one, but favorite sages memory, and it can be as
I'll give you a few.
as you wish.
All right. My favorite memories, my presidential addresses were highlights of my career. I love doing that. The people I've met, Barbara Bursey and Sally and Colleen and the other folks at Sages, Shelley, they're all special. Okay. my special friends that I've met, like George Bursey, Jerry Marks, all the people throughout the years, they're my dear friends. Jerry Free, I could go on and on. But another very special memory every year is We Are the Sages with the Japanese, because I go to tears when we do that every year,
Yes.
because that is not just a song, that is our soul. And that song says why we are different from all other societies. That says that we are a family. That's number. And finally, Todd and I doing in the Song Fest, I can do anything better than you can.
Oh,
That was
yes.
my favorite. That was my favorite moment.
Yeah.
That anything
was
you
it.
can do, I can do better. That was amazing.
That was it. So
That was
that's all I
amazing.
got.
Oh, those are great. Those are great.
Yeah.
Well, I know I speak for Shirin when I say that this has just been a fantastic podcast episode, and I'm sure our listeners will enjoy hearing from the living legend, and you are Dr. Jeffrey Ponsky. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us.
Thanks for letting me enjoy this. It's been a great opportunity.
It was awesome. Thank you so much.
And that wraps up today's episode of Sages Stories. You can view the show notes for any links to sites we referenced today. Visit sages.org for membership information and for the most recent news from our society. Follow us on Twitter at @sages_updates. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. See you again next time, and remember, you can't spell minimally invasive surgery without SAGES.